With this basic understanding of encryption and steganography, the next step is to find suitable tools that can perform these tasks. One operating system to consider is the Amnesiac Incognito Live System, or TAILS. The principal can install it on a removable storage device, a USB drive, and can plug it into almost any consumer computer to run. After use, there will be no evidence of clandestine activities on that computer unless there is some malicious firmware operating in the background. The principal does not need TAILS, as any operating system that can boot from these storage devices will work, but they would have to be custom built, which is outside the scope of this book. TAILS is an active project that is turnkey for what the principal may need. TAILS runs on removable storage and the system's random access memory. Once the power is off, all information on the memory is gone, leaving no evidence on the computer of clandestine activities. Only the removable storage device holds the compromising data. This is the only thing needing protection, and the principal can easily cache it. While many use TAILS to securely communicate or compute on another machine, the principal should use it with his own personal computer. This supports natural patterns of usage and avoids exposure to risks of using another person's computer. The machine stores no evidence, so if the adversary gets a hold of it, they will not get any compromising files or programs. It is a way of keeping the cover life sanitized. A choice in TAILS is persistent storage. This allows the principal to keep files on the removable storage device, such as encryption keys and software. It sets aside some space on the device and encrypts it so others cannot plug it in and see what is on it. The principal uses persistent storage to keep the keys and steganography software readily accessible when needed. Persistent storage uses a passphrase to generate the encryption, so the principal adheres to the principles relating to passphrases. TAILS comes with OpenPGP, which many trust, and to their knowledge, no intelligence agency has yet compromised it. However, no intelligence agency will publicize their ability to crack a system people trust. Regardless, if sophisticated and well-funded intelligence agencies concerns the principal, then he should reconsider his goals. TAILS does not come with steganographic software, which means the principal must add it. If he uses TAILS, then the steganography software must be a standalone executable program. It should not need installation, only a file to run. Regardless of how the principal installs and runs it, he must test the tools and equipment before he fields them. A quick Google search will yield a suitable list of available software. If the principal does not trust publicly available software, then he must develop his own. Due to the difficulty of finding whether the adversary compromised the system, the principal uses an air gap when dealing with compromising plain text. An air gap is when the computer system does not connect to a network. If there's malicious software on the machine, especially at the basic input-output system, BIOS, level, then it can start copying and sending data from what the principal is doing to an adversary's server over the network. Ensuring the air gap keeps any communications that may hold the information from transmitting to adversarial servers. However, if the adversary has infected the BIOS and is actively collecting from it, then the principal has bigger issues because the adversary is now targeting him. This is just an extra step for security. The process of ensuring an air gap is 1. Boot the system into TAILS. 2. Disable the Wi-Fi modem so the computer system does not connect to any networks and ensure no wired Ethernet connections. 3. Upload or type the message, encrypt it, and sanitize the ciphertext. Remove formatting. 4. Upload whatever media to use as a steganography container from its original storage device, camera memory card, USB stick, and embed the ciphertext. Overwrite the original source file with the new steganographic file so there are no discrepancies. 5. Clean up the system by erasing the old documents and ensure that no file transfer outside the computer. 6. Reboot the system without TAILS and deliver the prepared communication however is most proper for the operation. Now that the principal securely packaged the message, the next step is to decide how he will deliver the message to the recipient. This is the difference between augmented and network-based contact. Augmented contact is one that does not use ubiquitous communication mediums. Whether it is a microdot, floppy disk, USB drive, microSD card, or a specially calibrated photograph, think steganography, the medium is a physical device which the principal or resident passes in a face-to-face meeting as described in another chapter. By far, this is the most secure in terms of technical surveillance because the adversary cannot surreptitiously copy it as it travels across the airwaves or across a wired network. However, because it relies on physically passing the medium, it is susceptible to physical surveillance. Whether the principal uses this will depend on the capabilities of the adversary. When it comes to network communications, neither the principal nor resident need to change the way they access the internet. The principal does everything as normal. If the principal or resident posts photographs to Facebook, Imgur, or any other social media sites, then they should continue to do so. The difference is the occasional photograph of a beautiful landscape the resident enjoys posting has a concealed message in it. They do not change any natural patterns when communicating publicly. The adversary could hire hackers, and while skills and access to systems may vary between hackers, basic hackers can still uncover quite a bit about a target's activities through technical surveillance of either the principal or resident. One such example is if the hacker decides to infiltrate the home or work networks. They can see which sites the target visits and what he posts. If a target changes his patterns, then even a low-skilled hacker may still spot these changes, which may lead to more scrutiny or hiring a better hacker. While there are methods of countering this type of personal surveillance, like using Tor and going to open Wi-Fi networks, the principal should only do this after performing physical surveillance detection. The principal avoids leading a technologically savvy and well-equipped adversary to any location where he will behave differently than his natural patterns. This is a proper time to discuss Tor. When most people think of the darknet and anonymity, some of the first thoughts revolve around Tor. To be clear, this is not a requirement for effective and secure technical communications, and depending on the circumstances, its use may pose a risk to operations, depending on how heavily monitored traffic is. If an internet service provider is actively watching the IP addresses and ports used by Tor, then it can very well compromise the operation. Even if the adversary is not working closely with the internet service providers, they can set up several malicious Tor relays and do cryptanalysis on those communications. Many people will face a false sense of security into Tor and thus accept a higher level of risk. However, Tor does offer benefits, primarily free and anonymous hosting. If the principal must issue information to the public, then Tor may be the right choice while mitigating any retributions from the public message. However, that is outside the scope of this book. At this point of the clandestine operation, the principal has a relationship with the resident and they are not dealing with messages to the public. If the adversary has the capabilities to watch and analyze cyber communications, and they take it very seriously, then it is best to use another form of contact. The principal may augment physical communications with encryption and steganography, but the principal keeps the communications from the airwaves or networks. Lastly, making unsecured virtual contact has a very narrow set of use cases in terms of security. The nature of communicating in such a way the adversary sees or hears means the principal cannot mean what he says. This is the nature of brevity. This is like a simpler version of creating a unique language or encryption, and thus the principal teaches the residents before its use. The principal should only use unsecured virtual contact to start another secure form of communication. The primary example of this would be to reschedule a contact, whether it was changing the location, day, or time of a physical meeting, or to notify the other party of an uploaded steganographic container. The principal should plan these communications and schedule them at the last meeting to limit the frequency of contact. However, circumstances arise that need flexibility, and the principal will have some type of public-facing communication to handle that. Communications can either be persistent or scheduled. Persistent forms of communication include those where the recipient constantly watches for communications, like a phone, radio, SMS, or application that notifies the recipient as soon as a message arrives. The recipient carries these devices always. Persistent is better, but not always possible. Scheduled communications are those where the device is not on the recipient always, and the parties keep a schedule to ensure that the recipient checks the device at a specified time and duration. It is always a clever idea to have a backup scheduled form of communication. The means of communication should be already available to the resident so the principal does not introduce foreign equipment into the resident's life. If the principal must give the resident equipment, then a catalyst and cover must go with it. When creating the brevity code, the principal considers covers. The discussions over unsecured communication mediums must fall within the context of the relationship. Codes like "the eagle has flown the nest" have no place in the clandestine world unless both parties are avid bird watchers. They are watching a specific eagle. It is very probable in terms of seasons and time of day that one of the parties just watched this eagle leave its nest, and that eagle and that nest is key to their relationship. Otherwise, the principal is significantly more realistic about the topics of conversation. Natural dialogue. The principal only uses dialogue that is natural. The principal does not try to incorporate so much flexibility for variables he may or may not use. The principal may name options to prevent unnatural dialogue, such as red for Tuesday at 12 p.m., yellow for Thursday at 5 p.m., and so on. Attempts to incorporate specific date-time variables into the code, like referencing the book's series number and chapter as indicators of days and hours, may not seem natural. This is unnecessary as many people have consistent schedules and the principal does not take the resident out of his natural patterns. There should not be a need to fine-tune the specific times when the principal knows the resident's availability is the first Wednesday of every month after work between 5 and 7 p.m. If needed, the principal names the options that coincide with the resident's natural patterns and shift that as many cycles as needed. This is also true for setting up various locations to meet. Sometimes, the meeting venue becomes unsuitable. This can be due to higher popularity, development of a location since the principal scheduled the meeting, or shared internet site goes down. Having this backup ensures that the principal will not have to approach the resident again in an unsecured manner. The conversation or message must make no sense to anyone who is listening to or reading it. Reciting a bunch of arbitrary or random numbers is obviously clandestine activity. Just do a search for number stations. However, that is not what the principal does, and this section is discussing communications inside adversarial controlled areas. If the principal sets up a number station or similar, he would become a target very quickly. Instead, the principal uses familiar words that were redefined to have operational meaning. The principal sets up some form of brevity to alter scheduled contacts in the event something comes up where the principal must reach the resident, or vice versa, like an emergency. The principal sets up at least one of each type of system, one technical and one non-technical. Technical includes public forums, underground radio transmissions, and so on. Non-technical includes something like an advertisement in a newspaper or bulletin board. Regardless, both are easy to set up and offer an element of reliable redundancy to make or reestablish contact. The key points to take away from this chapter are: understanding when using technical communications is proper, as concealment containers or if the parties are geographically separate. Strong covers and normal behavior is of higher importance than using innovative technologies, and while these methods conceal information, it is still vulnerable to the physical world.